What do you call a defenseman that's put up 47 points in just 38 games, leads his team in points by 17 halfway through the season, and is also putting up elite numbers defensively? The best defenseman in the world? Maybe even the best player in the world? Well, according to NHL media, apparently not even a candidate for the most valuable player in the league. Because the NHL.com writers just released their rankings of their favorites to win the Hart Trophy as of the halfway mark of the season. And to put it bluntly, I think there are some embarrassingly bad omissions on this list. And it highlights a trend that has unfortunately been going on for more than 75 years. Now don't get me wrong, I think the guys listed as favorites by NHL media are having amazing seasons, with Nathan MacKinnon leading the way with a ridiculous 68 points in just 44 games. Doing all that, with an injury-riddled Colorado roster that has seen its fair share of important roster pieces like Nichushkin and Drouin missing significant time, is absolutely worth an MVP shout. Or Kirill Kaprizov, who's still leading the Minnesota Wild in points by 12, despite missing 10 games. Nikita Kucherov, who's proved any naysayers wrong by absolutely dominating despite losing his favorite trigger man in Steven Stamkos. Or Leon Draisaitl, whose first half of the season should quiet anyone who calls him a power play merchant or a defensive liability. The guy has been dominant, despite playing with Kasperi Kapanen and Vasily Podkolzin most of the time. That's not meant to be a knock on either of those guys, but obviously neither of them compare to a Mikko Rantanen or a Braden Point. But regardless of all of these guys having incredible first halves of the season, you might have noticed something about the rankings. All of them are forwards. The only defenseman who even got a single vote was Zach Werenski, who's all the way down at number 9 on the list. But Quinn Hughes and Cale Makar got 0 votes. Not even a pity 5th place vote. I think that's absolutely unacceptable. And I have the numbers to back that up as well. But like I said earlier in the video, this isn't new. Look at this list of every single winner of the Hart Trophy since the end of World War II in 1945. In the 80 years since, the trophy has been won by some of the greatest players in the history of the game, with Wayne Gretzky leading the way with 9 Hart trophies in the 80s. That's 9 league MVPs in a 10-year span, just another bonkers Gretzky stat to add to the pile. Gordie Howe also won 6 league MVPs during his seemingly 300-year-long career. Also, as a random Gordie Howe fact, Howe started his playing career before Bobby Orr was even born, and he kept playing until after Bobby Orr had retired from the NHL. The man was legitimately timeless. But to get back to this list, if I had to ask you to guess how many of these 79 Hart Trophy winners were defensemen, what would your guess be? I mean, the logical argument is that there's 12 forwards, 6 defensemen, and a single starting goaltender on every roster in the NHL. So with that in mind, you would expect that on average, 6 out of every 19 Hart Trophy winners, or 32%, would be defensemen. 12 out of every 19, or 63%, would be forwards, and the remaining 5% would be goalies. Obviously, this assumes that every regular roster player has an equal chance of being the most valuable player in the league. And while that is a simplification, I think it's a reasonable one. In theory, any given defenseman should have an equal chance of being the most valuable player as any forward. So if we apply our ratios to the 79 years of Hart Trophy winners, we should get 50 forwards, 24 defensemen, and 5 goalies winning the trophy. Is that number of 24 defensemen winning the Hart Trophy close to what your guess was when I asked earlier? If you've been following hockey for a while, I'm assuming your answer is no, and you'd be absolutely right because the real answer is 4. A whopping 68 out of the 79 winners have been forwards, and the remaining 7 have been goalies. What's even crazier is that 3 out of the 4 Hart Trophy winning seasons by a defenseman were Bobby Orr. The only other defenseman not named Bobby Orr to win league MVP was Chris Pronger, back in the height of the dead puck era in the 1999-2000 season. That makes it just 2 defensemen who have won the Hart Trophy in almost 80 years. That just isn't right, in my opinion. I know we've had some incredible forwards in our game's history, but we've also had some equally as impactful defensemen as well. But they don't seem to be valued as such when it comes to voting for hardware like the Hart Trophy. And I think I know why. For decades, the main statistics that were captured on score sheets were the basics, like shots, goals, and assists. That's why when you plot each Hart Trophy winner over the past 80 years against their position in the NHL scoring race, it's not hard to see that being the highest point getter in the league has been one of the most important elements when it comes to winning a Hart Trophy. Only 5 times in the past 80 years has a player not been in the top 5 in scoring and has still gone on to win the league's MVP trophy. If you're interested, I've added some additional context to each of these outliers, so feel free to pause and read if you'd like. Defensive play was much harder to quantify on a score sheet in a sport as fluid as hockey. You just won't find stats like the Corsi or the controlled zone exits for defensemen in the past like Ray Bourque or Nick Lidstrom. It just didn't exist back then. So if you didn't get to watch the player in person or on TV, there was no way for you to determine their impact on a game other than looking at the scoring race. But that shouldn't be an excuse anymore. The modern game has almost every play contextualized and collected as a measurable stat. Things like rebounds created per 60, point shot setups per 60, controlled entry percentages, and even metrics related to the success of dump and chase plays. Everything is recorded. So there should be no excuse for a guy like Quinn Hughes to not be near the top of a list of favorites to win the Hart Trophy. Let me explain. Before I jump into the numbers, if you've enjoyed this video so far, I hope you choose to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel as it really helps me out. Okay, back to the numbers. Hughes has been one of the best defensemen in the entire league, especially over the past 2 seasons. And after winning his first Norris Trophy as the league's best defenseman last season, he's somehow taken yet another step this season by putting up 47 points in just 38 games. That puts him on pace for more than 100 points over an 82-game season. And he's done all that with several key members of the Canucks lineup like Miller, Pettersson, Hronek, and Demko missing significant time during the first half of the year. The guy has 17 more points than the next closest skater on the Canucks as a defenseman. And his importance to this team is inarguable. Quinn Hughes is the Vancouver Canucks. With Hughes on the ice, the Canucks are one of the best teams in the entire league. But without him, they're not very different from a lottery team. And I'm not exaggerating. Look at these 2 sets of underlying metrics. One of them belongs to the worst team in the league in the Chicago Blackhawks, and the other one is a Hughes-less Vancouver Canucks. They're almost identical when it comes to stats like their goals for, expected goals for, Corsi scoring chances, high danger scoring chances. But when you compare the very same Vancouver Canucks, but now with Quinn Hughes on the ice, it's a completely different team. One that has very comparable underlying metrics as an analytical darling team like the Carolina Hurricanes. That's one player being the difference between a bottom 5 and a top 5 team. It doesn't get more valuable than that. And to be completely honest, I don't see any other player having that sort of impact on their team as of now. And we can discuss this objectively by looking at each of the Hart Trophy favorites and compare the performance of their teams both with and without them. For reference, here's the Canucks stats once again, both with and without Quinn Hughes at 5-on-5. And here's Colorado with Nathan MacKinnon, one of the best teams in the league, and carry most of the play in terms of shots, chances, and goals. And here's Colorado without him. While definitely a worse team without MacKinnon on the ice, they still carry a majority of play thanks to the supporting cast of Mikko Rantanen and Cale Makar. Here's Kaprizov, who's been the brightest star on the Minnesota Wild this season. Again, great team with him, but not that much worse without him, at least in comparison to Hughes. Here's Nikita Kucherov, whose impact on the goals for percentage is bigger than both MacKinnon and Kaprizov. But his impact on the rest of the underlying metrics isn't that noteworthy thanks to how well balanced Tampa is. Leon Draisaitl is probably the closest when it comes to matching Hughes' impact so far this season. A 20% impact on the goals for percentage, and almost double digits in the rest of the underlying metrics. Leon's really been driving that Oiler bus more than ever this season. Jack Eichel is also on pace to have a career-best season, but his individual impact on his team isn't very different than that of Kucherov's. The Golden Knights are still an average team when Eichel isn't on the ice. As for Mitch Marner, the Leafs actually have a better goal share when he isn't on the ice in comparison to when he is. But that's not the case when you look at the underlying metrics, which still suggest that Marner is a significant positive when it comes to generating shots and chances. But Hughes is still on another level in comparison. And Connor McDavid's no different. While I still think he's the undisputed best player in the NHL, he's had a slightly down year by his standards thanks to a slow start in his first 10 games. And then there's Zach Werenski, who you might remember is the only defenseman who got any MVP votes in the NHL halfway awards rankings. While these are absolutely stellar numbers and a big reason for why Columbus surprisingly sits in a wildcard spot this deep into the season, they pale in comparison to Hughes' impact. And lastly, Hughes' old rival and fellow defenseman who was also snubbed in the Hart predictions? Cale Makar. Makar also suffers from the same problem, if you want to call it that, as some of the other guys on this list. They have other stars playing with them. Nathan MacKinnon has Mikko Rantanen and Cale Makar. Leon Draisaitl has Connor McDavid. And in the past, Hughes has had Miller and Pettersson as his supporting cast as well. But that just hasn't been the case so far this year. Hughes has been as close as it gets to a one-man show both offensively and defensively. And you can see that when you compare him against the list of players listed as favorites for the Hart Trophy. Quinn Hughes is far and away the single most valuable player to his team's success so far this season. And it's really not that close if I'm being honest. Draisaitl and MacKinnon are the closest to Hughes, but even they are a considerable ways behind. Obviously, the biggest omission in this list is Connor Hellebuyck, who also has a great chance of contending for the MVP this season. But considering he's the only non-skater in contention, I chose not to include him in this analysis. I do realize that all my points in favor of Hughes so far have been based just on raw statistics, and that stats can sometimes be misleading. But Hughes passes the eye test too. All of the clips you're watching are taken from the same game against the Leafs a couple of days ago. Time and time again, Hughes is able to use his skating and his stick checks to separate the puck from his often much bigger opponents. And that usually ends up turning into a scoring chance for either him or one of his teammates. But the thing that's most impressive about Hughes on the defensive side is his gap control. And if you watched my video about Gustav Forsling last year, you know how valuable a defenseman with elite gap control is. Like on this play, for example. After Carson Soucy turns the puck over with no one covering for him, the Leafs have an opportunity to break out on a clear 2-on-1. And that too against Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews of all people. But instead of retreating and accepting his fate on a 2-on-1, Hughes instead skates forward towards Marner to close the gap before he's able to make a play. It's a very simple play, but it very well could have prevented the Leafs from evening up the game. And he does this all game long, because he isn't able to overpower his opponents and needs to rely on his positioning to be an effective defenseman. His impact in every zone on the ice is incredible to watch on a nightly basis. He's able to single-handedly transform his team more than any other player in the league, in my opinion, which is why I think he should be in the conversation for the Hart Trophy at the very least. What do you think about the bias towards forwards when it comes to the Hart Trophy? I think we need some more recognition for defensemen across the board when it comes to hardware in the NHL. Let me know what you think in the comments. I loved making this video, and I hope you enjoyed watching it as well. If you did, I hope you choose to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.